I do want to start with this continuing discussion over the Utah Jazz and remaking this roster, as we've talked a lot about on this show pretty extensively. The Utah Jazz have every intention of blowing this thing up over the summer from all angles. And I think that we've talked a lot recently about their head coach and Quinn Snyder. Sources yesterday again confirmed to me that the Jazz have had no discussions about making a head coaching change, either in the near term or in the long-term future, and none of those discussions will happen until the summer. So all of this Quinn Snyder replacing Greg Popovich talk that's been going on this week seems to be just talk. It seems to be a lot of hyperbole. But I think one thing that is very clear is that the Utah Jazz are intent on making significant changes this summer. And what that means is I think there's a lot of people around this league. In fact, I know that a lot of people around this league believe that the Utah Jazz are going to trade Rudy Gobert, Jake, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think that it is the first step to what you want this team to be. I think unfortunately that Rudy is kind of the spearhead for remaking this team, meaning that he's the centerpiece. He is the thing that both right now powers you defensively, but also both hold you back immensely. And I think that in and of itself makes trading him particularly difficult. How are you doing over there?
What do you mean? I'm doing fine.
You're very proficient in that motion, I have to say.
That would be this motion. The shake weight. I think it is interesting how controversial Rudy Gobert is, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think people want him to be, that people clearly want him to get better and have more of an offensive game and give the Jazz more options, but that clearly is not going to happen because if it was going to happen, it would have already, and I think that that's the trouble with Rudy Gobert. And so when you start thinking about, all right, well, let's say that they are going to trade him, which we have every indication that, that's a definite possibility, assuming that other teams are interested. There's not. Another problem is there's not like 50 teams that want Rudy Gobert, dude. There's not like a bunch of people.
There's not 5 teams that want Rudy Gobert, and there's probably not 5 teams that can afford Rudy Gobert. And this is why everybody's like, "Oh, sources my ass." Well, look at all the rumors that we've talked about. We were able to I can say with all confidence that there's no question in my mind the Utah Jazz and the Boston Celtics were having trade talks. And I would say those talks were never close to landing you Marcus Smart, for instance, because the Jazz don't have the chips in the middle of the season to do that. The climate in the summer is very different. You are able to make much more significant trades because of free agency being open. You're able to make much more significant progress in rebuilding a roster like this because teams are able to do more things because you're not trying to trade a guy like Rudy Gobert or bring in a Rudy Gobert to your roster in the middle of the season. He requires a shift in philosophy to fit him into that roster. And the other problem is when we talk about Rudy Gobert's trade value, and this I'm sure is going to not be the most popular thing I've ever said on this show, he doesn't have much trade value. I was talking to an NBA scout yesterday who was telling me straight up how many offenses can afford Rudy Gobert's lack of production. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about, okay, what is Rudy Gobert good for on a nightly basis? He's going to give you, he's the best rebounder in the NBA, arguably, right? Rudy Gobert is going to give you, let's say, 12 to 14 rebounds a night on the average, right? Yeah. But is he going to give you 20 points a night? He's probably not. And when you look at his value and how people view Rudy Gobert, there's no doubt he has higher value to the Utah Jazz because their offense in many situations is predicated on him setting picks at the top and getting rebounds. Mm-hmm. That's a main cog in the Jazz offense, which is why in so many situations they bog down and struggle. Because you have to, if you are the Utah Jazz, have big rebounding nights from Rudy Gobert because of the volume of threes you shoot.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't have big rebounding nights, you're giving up a lot of points in transition. You're taking a lot of fouls to stop fast breaks. it's an odd circumstance that makes Rudy Gobert an imperative part of this offense. So ask yourself and who are the likely candidates? I think there's really I think there's really only probably 2-3 teams, and I think two of those teams would be Boston and I think Toronto are the two main teams that I could see doing a deal for Rudy Gobert where he ends up in their uniform. I mean, to a much lesser extent, I think Washington is one of those teams. But the problem for Washington is if they bring in Rudy Gobert, it likely means that Brad Beal is not there anymore. Is it Brad or Bradley these days?
I'm not
I
sure.
want to say
I
it's
mean, I know it's Michael Malone, but I'm not sure if it's Brad or Bradley.
yeah.
So, we
No.
will have to confirm that.
But you know what I
yeah.
mean? Like if you bring in Rudy Gobert, you're probably not keeping Bradley Beal
Yeah.
unless the Utah Jazz wind up eating half of the remaining salary owed to Rudy Gobert.
Well, and I think that's what they're going to have to do. And I think if you're the Utah Jazz, this is the tough thing. I mean, you have to understand that you're in between a rock and a hard place with this situation because of how much he's paid. And it would be one thing if he was paid a proper amount and he just didn't have a lot of trade value. But now you're talking about he's basically being paid double what he should be paid every single season.
By no fault of his own, though.
Yeah, that's not his fault for sure. But I think, what is his fault is the lack of offensive game he has. He doesn't have an offensive game. And everybody on the Jazz broadcast wants to be like, oh, well, a lot of people hate on Rudy and he has a huge impact. And I'm here to tell you that he doesn't have a massive impact on the offensive end. He rebounds and he sets great screens. That's what he does. It's not like you can give him the ball, even in the paint, and say, get me a bucket. You got to lob it to him, and that's pretty much it. So I look at Rudy and I say, hey, you're a dynamic, dominant defensive player. But that's not what this league is predicated on anymore. And so when we talk about trading him, I just think that it is going to be tough. You are going to have to eat some of that salary, and it's probably not going to be a beneficial trade for you, But you're going to do it anyway because you need to move on from Rudy Gobert to get going in the direction that this new regime wants to get going in, And so that's just what you're going to have to deal with. And yes, do I think it delays their timeline of winning a championship? It may by a season. It may delay you a bit because you got to get your money right, and you're probably going to be a lower-end Western Conference seed, next season because of this trade, because your money's going to be a bit locked up. But at the end of the day, it is what you have to do. It is the right move. Unpopular or not, it is the right move to become a better team. And my biggest concern out of all of this, whether they get picks in return or they somehow work out a deal to get a key contributor back or whatever crazy thing happens, my biggest thing is making sure that they take care of the relationship with Donovan Mitchell through this trade. Because if this trade means that they gotta be, not a terrible team, but they got to be a 7-8 seed, let's say. They got to be in the play-in to get to the playoffs for 1 year. I hope that Donovan and the organization are on the same page about that so we don't go through this thing again where it's like, oh, well, Donovan this and Donovan that, when the guy has never asked for a trade and wants to win a championship in Utah.
Well, that's the other thing that I continue to hear from people around the NBA, that Donovan Mitchell and I have no doubt that it's true that Donovan Mitchell has never demanded a trade.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that everybody is guessing that, if the Jazz go out in the first round. I think Donovan Mitchell understands where this team is and where this team's trying to go. And I think when you look at the numbers on Rudy Gobert's contract, I mean, it's a lot of money. I mean, he is owed a significant, I don't even know how you come down on the fact that he's owed 30, 35, 38, 41, 43, and 46.
Yeah, it just keeps going up, man.
$1 million. And it is, man, that's really tough to take. And the worst part is the 25-26 number is a player option. Mm-hmm. That $46.6 million is, just mark it down. Mm-hmm. You're paying that money. And if you look at the money that he has left after this year, I don't know. You're going to have to, if you're the Utah Jazz, you're going to have to get a significant amount of that money.
Yeah.
And it is, in my mind, I think it is just the cost of doing business. You are very much in a situation where you've hit a wall now. This is a good team that's not great. You've been that team for 3 years. And if you continue to operate in that fashion, you're going to be who you've been.
Yeah.
And so if you want to change the trajectory of this franchise, you are going to have to make decisions to right the wrongs of the Dennis Lindsay era. And I think you're going to have to lose for a year. You're going to have to be a 7, 8, 9, 10 team for a year to right the ship here. But I think if you sell that to Donovan Mitchell, I think he's on board with that. And I think that all Donovan Mitchell wants is the opportunity to compete for multiple championships during his career. And in my mind, if you make a Rudy Gobert trade this summer and you eat that contract, at least half of it, which is what I would guess you're going to have to pay 35 to 50% of the remaining value of that deal, I think that puts you on a path to winning 3 championships in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
But it's going to require a year of pain. And if Donovan Mitchell is here through the end of that, I think there's a real chance that you come out a real winner from a rebuilding year. Because I don't think there's any doubt that you're watching the final games of Mike Conley, Bojan Bogdanovic, Royce O'Neal. Royce O'Neal just refusing to take big 3-point shots,
which is crazy to me.
You have to make changes now. And I don't believe that Quinn Snyder's part of that change. I really don't. I'm not convinced of that. I will again say, I believe that the Jazz are fairly happy with the job that Quinn Snyder has done this year.
Well, again, this conversation about how much impact does Quinn have on when this team plays good and bad. Like, a lot of times, obviously we do this show weekdays basically every day. And there's multiple times per show where people will say, oh, well, Quinn never makes adjustments and Quinn doesn't do this and he sucks and you got to replace Quinn. And there are a lot of times where I'm just like, man, I just disagree with that. Like, I think that Quinn doesn't have a lot of adjustments he can make. I mean, how many times is he going to have to tell Royce to take the open shot or tell Don that he's got to drive and kick more? Or like, how many times is he going to have to go over the same concepts with this team? At some point, it falls upon the players to execute. And it feels like right now with the players they have, they can't get the job done. And that has to change.
Yeah, I think that my opinion remains solid. Quinn Snyder's an elite head coach in this league, and I think he is top 5 coaches right now. There are not many coaches that I would take over Quinn Snyder, and I know that a lot of Jazz fans are frustrated with him, especially in light of the fact that they don't play young guys on this team, that the Pascals and the Butlers of the world are not getting significant minutes. Hey, listen, that's a legitimate gripe. That's a legitimate thing to be beefing with Quinn Snyder about. But when you look at the number of wins and you look at the quality of play on the court from this team over the last 8 years, it's awfully difficult to argue with the way that Quinn Snyder has gone about constructing this team from an X and O's perspective. He's an elite head coach.
Yeah.
Now, there's also a conversation around, how many more years does this team have his ear? Like, has Quinn Snyder lost this locker room? I would even entertain that conversation as we have on this show. But what that tells me is I don't need to change Quinn Snyder. I need to change the locker room. This roster is old. This roster is slow. This roster is unathletic.
Well, and look where he's getting them, even with all that being the case.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still, getting to, I guess, the second round, and a lot of Jazz fans would say, well, the injuries really killed us against the Clippers, this and that. And what I'm telling you is this team still does not have an answer for a corner shooter being wide open because Rudy can't guard the paint and that corner. So I'm telling you, the reason that keeps taking place is because Quinn doesn't have other options. The perimeter is not nearly athletic enough. So that's why I say, getting to it here, I have to agree that I'm not so sure that Quinn is the problem. Are there other options? Sure, but it feels like right now, if you were to make that change, you're just making change for the sake of change, not because
which isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's not the right thing to do.
To bring this full circle, I think when you look at Rudy Gobert's trade value, I think it's pretty limited. I think when you understand who Rudy Gobert is as a player, you begin to understand, again, not to be redundant, but there's not a whole lot of rosters where he fits offensively,
Mhm.
because there aren't a whole lot of teams that are going to structure their offense the way that the Jazz do. Pick and roll is a huge part of this league. I get that. But you cannot ask Rudy Gobert to do much more offensively. Like, he cannot dribble the ball. And again, I think his highest best use is as an offensive rebounder. Set that pick and roll that leads you to a mid-range or a three ball, and let Rudy Gobert go and dominate the offensive glass. Let him take lobs. Let him get rebounds and putbacks. That's his highest best use. Understanding that, teams are going to leverage the Jazz because, A, they know that Rudy Gobert is overpaid.
Mhm.
They know that he underperforms that contract. And I think teams know that to remake this roster, the Jazz have to move on from that deal.
Yeah.
It's not that the Jazz necessarily have to move on from Rudy Gobert. They have to move on from his contract. And I think that's a very different discussion, because it's easy to pick on Rudy Gobert because of the contract. If the contract were not an issue, I think you'd be fine with Rudy. Frankly, if you were paying Don what you're paying Rudy, you would be fine.
Yeah.
And if you were paying Rudy what you were paying Don, you'd be fine. If you were committing $41 million a year to a wing player that's a star in this league and Donovan Mitchell, you'd be fine.
Well, because that's the norm of the league. That's the culture in the league. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how it should be set up.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think the trade value for Rudy Gobert is very difficult to measure. And I think most deals are executed in the summer, but a lot of that foundation is laid during the trade deadline. And I think that's why when you hear that, hey, the Jazz are talking to Washington, the Jazz are trying to make a larger deal that involved Washington. You know that the Jazz would love to add a Pascal Siakam to this lineup. I think they would love to have a Pascal Siakam on this team. I think that OG Anunoby is another guy that you would like. I don't believe that the Boston Celtics are and what's the right way to say this? I don't think the Boston Celtics are excited about the prospect of trading a Jaylen Brown, because I think if you move, and they had talks about Jaylen, but you're seeing now his maturity and his growth, and you're seeing that Jaylen and Tatum are now playing much better together. I mean, they're going to make deals, but who's the third team that gets involved? And let's just say that somehow you wind up making a deal with Boston. There's got to be a third team involved.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and this was the Knicks discussion. There was so much talked about with Donovan Mitchell and the Knicks, and we were able to confirm through our sources that the Knicks absolutely called the Jazz multiple times at the deadline trying to make a Donovan Mitchell deal.
Right.
And the Utah Jazz shut that down. They never even entertained the conversation.
And what would you expect the Knicks to do, to be clear?
If the Knicks are not calling the Jazz on Donovan Mitchell at this past deadline, they're derelict in their duty.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it should not be a surprise. And listen, I got news for you. There's not a whole lot of organizations in this league that don't want Donovan Mitchell. If Donovan Mitchell were available for trade, the Jazz their phones would be on fire. Donovan Mitchell is a well-respected player in this league that a lot of teams would value highly. The same cannot be said for Rudy Gobert.
Mm-hmm.
He is not a well-respected player in this league. I think people view him as a defensive stud who is very, very limited and massively overpaid.
Yeah.
I hear that on almost every time I talk to somebody around this league about Rudy Gobert. He is a great defensive player who cannot help you offensively, and he is way overpaid.
Yeah.
He is way overpaid. So I think that the Jazz are in a terrible spot. I mean, Dennis Lindsey screwed this team for the next 5 years. And I mean, some of this is on Ryan Smith because he approved that Rudy Gobert contract before it was signed. He signed off on it. So some of this belongs at the feet of Ryan Smith. But at that point, what are you going to say? No. So I just think the Jazz are in a very interesting situation. And I don't have any doubt that they're going to try and trade Rudy Gobert this summer.
Yeah.
I would put it at a 70-30 that they make a deal happen.
And I just think it's necessary. It's what has to be done.
Absolutely.
I know it sucks. I know that it's uncomfortable. I know that all this stuff we're talking about them having to cover half the contract, or like some sort of that, like that's kind of going to be the position that they're in. They're going to have to, cover at least some of that contract. It's uncomfortable to talk about and to think about, but what is more uncomfortable to talk and think about is all right, well, let's say you don't do the Rudy trade and you just stay here.
Yeah.
That's not an option either. So that's why I say when you're talking about trading this level of player, the only thing that matters is making sure that the guy that you keep and that you build around in Donovan Mitchell is content, understands the plan, understands the timeline of the plan, and is confident in what you are doing.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, go ahead and do it. Like, I can't stress that enough. You just want to make sure after you make all these trades that Don is good and you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think the hard change is always hard.
Yeah.
Change is not easy, and this team needs, I mean, whatever change analogy you want to make, they need to swap motors on this thing.
I mean, listen,
you have to do it.
Look at how much the Joe Ingles torn ACL trade to Portland thing impacted the team. It impacted the media circle. It impacted the team. The fan base was
But
was all
again,
upset.
why did that happen? Because Ryan Smith came out and said we're not trading Joe Ingles.
Yeah, and I
then,
don't know why you would say that.
And then what happened? You traded Joe Ingles, and a lot of fans were upset about it. I'm telling you now, if you worry about fan sentiment and building a championship team, nobody would ever win a championship.
Yeah, I mean, you have to make again.
Yeah.
This is why I think when everyone's like, oh, well, when you're a GM of an NFL team or an NBA team or whatever, it's not that hard of a job. And it's like, yeah, it is, dude. You know these guys personally. You have relationships with these guys. You understand, all right, if I trade Joe to Portland, that means X, Y, and Z, and this is how he's going to be affected, and I have to deal with, my conscience has to deal with that, and with Ryan Smith, I think he's got some learning to do. There's a reason owners don't run their mouth on Twitter about players they're going to trade or not trade. And it's because you never know when the torn ACL's
wind up looking
coming
bad.
out.
You wind up looking bad.
And I'm not saying that Ryan's an idiot, but you just shouldn't be doing that.
He's a young owner. He made a mistake.
Yeah.
I think that this team is in good hands. I truly believe in what they're doing. I do. Oh, hey, look at that. Greg Hawkins, the actor, is back. Greg, good to see you, buddy.
Wasn't it a couple weeks ago he said he was going to be gone because he was
did,
filming,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, and if you follow Greg Hawkins on Instagram, you know that he's been busy filming. Let's hope you don't wind up on the cutting room floor. There's no such thing as a cutting room floor anymore, is there?
Never heard of that.
I fucking it. Like, what do you mean you've never heard of the cutting room floor?
I haven't.
Oh my God. I give up. Yeah, I give up. Cody Strickland, good morning to you. He says, good morning, men. By the way, I hate Don with the ball in the last 4 minutes of the game, but hey, it was a fun season. Well, the season's not over yet.
See what I mean?
Who do you both believe will be on the roster next year, and what will Angus be looking at? Ainge, thank you. Be looking at over the summer to replace people. I mean, that's an
impossible. Yeah, it's impossible.
I mean, I think the obvious ones that will not be here. I have to believe that Royce and Bogdanovich are gone.
For different reasons, though.
Yeah, for very different reasons. Yeah. Because I think you need more athleticism, and I think Royce O'Neal is a bench player in this league.
Yeah.
And again, Royce and Rudy Gobert are not dissimilar in that they have a really important role on this team, but would not on any other team.
Right.
And I think Rudy's got upside offensively. I do. I think if Rudy Gobert spends 4 months in the gym, if Rudy Gobert hires a skills coach and learns to dribble the basketball and breaks this habit, and I know I've talked about this repeatedly, but he's got a terrible habit as a big of bringing the ball down below his shoulders.
Yeah.
And it cripples him offensively.
To turnover.
And he just cannot continue to do that. If he spends a summer just fixing that one skill alone and learning to dribble, I mean, he becomes a much more effective offensive player. But he is never going to be dynamic offensively.
But he's never shown. So I agree with that. But what I'm getting to here is that he's never shown the willingness to do that in the summer.
Well, he's on he's on the right side of 30. I mean, I think he's 29 years old.
But here's my point. Even at listen, age has been redefined in the NBA.
Yes.
Look no further than LaMelo Ball and Ja Morant, right? Obviously, those guys are two very athletic players, and their games are totally different. I get it. But the point I'm getting to here is that I don't care what position you play in the NBA, there is zero excuse not to be able to shoot a basketball. None. And
Not today. That's exactly right.
and
I mean,
and I
in
just can't get
2022, yeah.
I can't get behind this idea that Rudy doesn't have time. You had time to play in the Olympics, but you don't have time to work on your game.
Well, and I
Come
think
on,
if you
dude.
look at the bigs around the NBA, I mean, who are the most dynamic
Dude,
bigs
he's
in the
the
NBA?
only one that can't dribble and can't shoot. Look
Yeah.
at every other big in the league. At all of them. I'm
Well,
not
I
kidding.
think if
all
you
of them.
look at second tier bigs, even like
Mason Plumlee,
look at a Bam Adebayo.
Bam Adebayo.
I mean, Bam is probably the best second tier center in the NBA. He's not Joel Embiid. He's not Karl Anthony
Miles
Towns.
Turner.
A guy, yeah. I mean, I guess I think Bam Adebayo is the best second tier center. I think Miles Turner is a very limited player as well, but I look at Bam. Bam is a great shot blocker, very good defender, but he's also got that push shot. He's also got the ability to rebound, power dribble up for a dunk.
Look at Jared Allen.
Jared Allen's an
second-tier
interesting
center.
one. I look at Brook Lopez. I think is more prototypical now than a lot of guys, like because of his ability to shoot the three. I mean, there aren't many centers that are going to be Joel Embiid. I mean, they're just.
But Brook Lopez is a perfect example. And I want people to go and look into this because this is absolutely the case. And they talked about it on the broadcast when the Jazz played the Bucks, which is Brook Lopez was a guy who was laughed at for his just terrible defense and inability to shoot a basketball.
Yes.
And where is he at now? I'm not telling you he's a defensive player of the year, but I am telling you he can play some defense now, and he can shoot that three regularly.
Brook Lopez is the best three-point shooting center in the NBA. I mean, I would probably say in the world. I mean, the guy can really shoot. But my point is, Rudy's never going to be that guy. Rudy Gobert's never going to be that guy.
Wow.
And if you aspire to rebuild this roster and be a year in, year out championship contender, and again, my feeling is if you want to win, 3 and 5 years is what I always like to point to. You're going to have to get a number 2 star. Like you're going to have to get somebody that's equal or a little better than Donovan Mitchell to do that. In order to do that, you're going to have to vastly improve this roster. And I think when you're looking at what is available as a pure number 2, I mean, it's going to take a year to get there.
Yeah.
And I think a year from now, this team is going to be a 7, 8, 9 team in the West. I think that they are going to have significantly better cap space a year from now than they do right now. And I think that's when you're gonna compete for a true star. And if I look around the league, it's very difficult to get guys like Bradley Beal at the trade deadline. And he's probably the perfect example of why you can't make deals at the deadline, but you can in the summer.
Yes.
Because Bradley Beal isn't married to Washington. He's married to the money that he can make in Washington, which if you do a sign and trade with Washington for Bradley Beal in the summer, he can sign a supermax deal, and then you can trade that deal in a sign and trade. So the Washington Wizards can pay him exponentially more than any other team because they have his bird rights. So my point is, in all of this, that's going to be the question. Who's that number 2 star that the Utah Jazz wind up getting? That is the ultimate Danny Ainge question mark. Because if you truly want to, and I'm a big believer that Ryan Smith is going to win multiple championships. I think the guy has shown you he's willing to pay the tax, which is not something that we have ever seen here in Utah. That, hey, top end of budgets is not something the Miller family was known for, especially post LHM. I think Ryan Smith is doing business completely differently. He's remade the brand. Now, love or hate the uniforms, but he's remade the brand. He is doing things in partnerships on the court, off the court. I love the idea of, hey, they're doing an all-female broadcast. I love the idea that hopefully they're going to have their own TV deal, and hopefully they're going to have third-tier content and marketing dollars. But what does all of that mean if you're not a good team? It means nothing. You are far devaluing yourself if you're not competing for championships.
Yep.
And I think that this team's going to compete for multiple championships. It's simply a matter of time. Brandon Whiteside says Rudy for Bam and Hero.
No.
One, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo are very good friends. So you can just pretty much write that one off. Edgar Garcia, what's up? Morning, players. He says, Memphis says, don't you feel as if Donovan has taken a completely different role since Boyan and Jordan have been shooting the lights out? Because he can pass good, but his shooting is so off right now. Donovan Mitchell is not playing good basketball right now. The last week has not been good for him.
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see him break out of that, and he's going to. You're not as talented. You don't shoot as well as he shoots and continue to struggle. The question for me will continue to be fourth quarters for Donovan Mitchell. And I think it is ridiculous that we're asking if he's clutch.
Well,
I have no doubt if he's clutch.
But how do you have no doubt? What has he done? And I'm not trying to hate on the guy, but if you really take a hard look at it, what has really done in his time so far that has said, hey, this guy is clutch? Has he hit big shots? Has he?
But he wants big shots. And
that's true, yes.
When you're as talented as he is and you shoot as well as Donovan Mitchell shoots, the desire for the ball in those moments is 3/4 of the battle.
Yeah.
Because when you let go of that ball, it's going to go in.
That's every day.
I mean, eventually it's going to go in. And you miss every shot you don't take. And I think Donovan Mitchell is a guy that has an appetite for big moments. I think a lot of the issue is that he doesn't have a number two. So Mike Conley it was nice to see Mike make some threes the other night and play well because Donovan Mitchell needs somebody else.
Yeah.
And again, I'll just keep going back to pick the scab of the bubble loss to Denver, where they forced Don to give the ball up. And this is why I don't like Donovan Mitchell on the ball.
Yeah.
This is why you're paying the luxury tax for Mike Conley.
Well, it's so funny. I mean, you look around the league and, like, again, I don't know, for those of you who watched that Knicks-Nets game over the weekend, the Knicks were rolling out a double team consistently. And finally, Steve Nash draws up a strategy where Kevin Durant is off the ball and they just got to get it to him. And all of a sudden it's buckets again. I mean, your best player has to be off the ball to maximize their abilities. And I think, I tend to lean your way a bit on Don and the clutch thing. Like it's probably too early to be like, oh, he's not clutch. But at the same time, he also hasn't really earned his stripes in clutch moments yet. You know?
And by the way, he hasn't really had a huge moment to be part of. The playoffs, he was hurt last year. I think that was their best opportunity. And he has the ankle injury that he rushed back from.
Yeah.
But he rushed back like this. And this also is part of the Donovan Mitchell maturity process.
Yeah.
The whole medical staff and my team versus your team
thing. Memphis thing.
Yeah. But the truth is the Jazz medical staff were right to hold him out. They were right because he came back and immediately re-injured himself.
Yeah.
So my point in all of this is Donovan Mitchell is growing and maturing right before your eyes. And I will, again, go to my grave saying this guy is a superstar. He has so much upside potential. It is simply a matter of what are the Jazz going to do to bring that out of him?
Yeah.
Because he can pay Chris Brickley tens of millions and trillions of dollars over the summer. If they don't get him a true number two, it's all a waste.
Yeah.
And if they don't get him a true number two, then he will be a Knick.
Yeah.
He will. I mean, he is going to win or he will not be here.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him 1 minute for that. And for everybody that wants to vilify Donovan Mitchell, what would you do different than what he's doing? And the answer is nothing. Because these guys don't play for money. They make tons of money.
Yeah.
And they get their contracts, and he will get a supermax. They want rings. They want to win. And there's nothing wrong with that. All right, couple more comments here. Rudy Sanchez says, morning, fellas. Jazz need to do whatever deal to get out of Gobert's contract, and I think they will. Sherwood, S-H-E-R space
Welcome to the show.
Wood. Welcome to the show. Nobody wants.
Look at you.
Yeah, seriously. Nobody wants Rudy. Let's be honest. I don't know about wants. Want is not the right word that I would use. I think there are teams that would like to have Rudy Gobert on their roster.
Nobody wants to be put in a bad cap situation.
Nobody wants to pay Rudy Gobert $41 million a year.
Yeah.
Nobody. That's the way I would say it. He says these dudes are kind of out of touch. They say Utah can win 3 championships in 5 years with the right moves. No way. Okay, well, I would only point to teams that have done that. And I would look at the Lakers in the Kobe Shaq years. I mean, you had a generational talent in Kobe Bryant. You did not have a number 2. So you went and traded for a guy like Shaquille O'Neal. And trust me when I say it was Shaq and Kobe and a bunch of role players that won championships there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I look at Michael Jordan. You had a generational player. And then you went and drafted Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant. And you completely changed that roster.
Yeah.
I look at the Chicago Bulls. You had a generational player in Michael Jordan. And then Horace Grant went away, so you added Tony Kukoc and Dennis Rodman, and you won championships. I look at the Kobe Lakers after the Kobe Shaq Lakers. You had a generational talent in Kobe Bryant, and what did you do? You went out and added Pau Gasol, a true number 2 that could be leaned on, and a bunch of role players, and you won championships. If you look at, look at any of the look at the Golden State Warriors, right? You had generational talent in Steph Curry. You had, arguably the best shooter at the time in the NBA was not Steph, it was Clay. You drafted Draymond Green, who I still think is one of the best defensive players in the NBA. And then you won a championship, but then you went and got Kevin Durant. And then you won more championships. You can quickly remake your roster in this league.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a 10-year plan. But what does it take? It takes huge testicles and a bunch of money.
Yeah.
And if I'm right, I think you have both. I think you have an incredible amount of brass and a whole lot of money in Ryan Smith.
Yeah.
I think you have a really good basketball executive in Justin Zanuck. I think you have a proven team builder in Danny Ainge. It's not crazy to think that this team will remake this roster in the summer. And this is why I say to Jazz fans, why are you so opposed to dynamic change? Because if you want to win, and you want to win the way teams have won, and I'm not saying the Jazz now or ever will be a dynasty, but if you want to have a chance at being a dynasty, you have to go out and make dynamic change to your roster. You need to take a flamethrower to this son-of-a-bitch and keep Donovan Mitchell and blow everybody else up. And if that means that, hey, Quinn Snyder doesn't want to coach this team through another rebuild, okay, we'll see you later. Thanks for everything you've done. Congratulations on replacing Greg Popovich. We're going in a different direction.
Pack your shit. Let's go.
Because if you're not on board with what Ryan Smith is doing, we don't want you here. If you're not on board with what Ryan's vision for the organization is, pack your shit, Skippy. It's time to go.
Pack your shit. Let's go.
Right? It's time to go. But my guess is Quinn Snyder is on board with what Ryan Smith is doing. And if they remake this roster and you keep Quinn Snyder and Donovan Mitchell, those are 2 really big pieces to winning a championship.
I'm for real.
So I'm telling you, the
blueprint is laid out, dude.
This team is going to win. And if it takes Ryan Smith and a $1 million worth of chain to pull this team along with him, it's going to happen.
Facts.
Because he's going to make his money.
Yeah.
This is a dude who doesn't lose a whole lot of bread in his investments. And he's not going to lose on the Jazz. I'm telling you that right now. So with all due respect, Sherwood, you and I disagree. Dallin Sproul says, Ryan Smith is figuring it out. It's like he's a teenager, full of energy and ready to work with so much passion, but has mistakes to make. Yeah, I agree with that. Eric DeVera, good morning. Ainge should go for Brandon Ingram next season. I like Brandon a lot. BI is a really good player.
Second-tier player, though.
But he's a second-tier player.
Yeah.
But by the way, I think he's an upgrade to Bojan Bogdanovic, right? Because that's the role on this current team that he would play, right? You would plug him into where Bojan is, but he's more dynamic to the rim. He is certainly a better defender because he's just so damn long.
Yeah.
But he has got that sleepy gene in him.
I think CJ McCollum is the definitive upgrade, but you're not going to get
Yeah,
him.
but he's a 2. I think Bojan's a 3-4.
Well, yeah.
He's a 3-4. He's a larger player.
Yeah.
I think you need somebody that gets to the basket. And CJ is much more of a shooter. I think Brandon Ingram is a guy. I would like to have Brandon on the roster, but he's not the number 2 that you're looking for.
Yeah.
He's not the number 2 that you're looking for. Leonard Donnan and love you. I love you too, man. He says, hey guys, love the show. I'm back. The Jazz need a pure playmaking point guard and a stretch big and better perimeter defense. Is that all? That's all.
Hey guys.
That's it?
Hey guys.
The Jazz should try and acquire Dejounte Murray. Amazing defender and all-around pure point guard, but he's the future of the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah, so you're going to have to give up a lot and pay a lot to get him.
I don't see the Spurs moving that guy.
Yeah.
I don't. Do you think the Jazz can acquire a true second star for Don? I do. Obviously, I do. Brandon Strickland. Morning, guys. First comment. Hope the Jazz can pull it together. Well, welcome to the show.
Wait. Hold on. Wait, we got to hit the pause button here. So is Brandon Strickland related to Cody Strickland?
And Brandon Whiteside?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, are we like putting names together here?
Could
Or?
be.
Who the f*** is that guy?
Eric C. says, morning, everyone. Good morning. John Jackson says, who do you think we could get for Rudy or Boyan? And Boyan. Again, I think that's a really difficult question to answer.
Right now it is. You have to see what the landscape of the league is after the finals are done. You got to see what's going down, because that's basically how the league works. So like you have the trade deadline, and you go through all that madness, and you do whatever it is you're going to do at the deadline, and then once you're through that, then you got to go through the final stretch run of the season and through the playoffs. And then once the finals are over, because you got to remember, everybody in the league goes to the NBA finals. I don't know how many people know this. Like, all the executives go. Like, it's a big deal.
Yes.
No deals get done during the finals intentionally. But what does happen at the finals is there's a lot of conversations that happen. There's a lot of, hey, let's have a drink.
Yes.
Hey, let's do this. Hey, let's do that. And a lot of, cuddling up done so that when the finals are over. Yeah, dude. Yeah, you get nice and cozy with the people that you want to make deals with, and you become friends with them. And
relationships are made at the All-Star break in the NBA Finals.
Yeah,
I agree with that 100%.
And then you're going to start making calls, and you're going to say, "Hey, remember that conversation we had?"
And for those of you who don't know, the way that the cycle works is, hey, your All-Star game, you're into the NBA Finals, you're into the pre-draft camp in Chicago. Like you're into these individual workouts, and there's just a lot of time to sip some scotch and talk basketball.
Yeah.
At a lot of these events. And what you'll see is, like in Chicago, there is an old restaurant called the Pump Room. And like you would see guys huddled up in corners in the Pump Room.
Yeah.
Just talking, and like you would see guys in hotel lobbies talking and coming out of private rooms talking. Like that stuff happens. And then you have the NBA owners meetings, and you have you just have a lot of opportunity to network and make deals.
Rudy deals don't just happen by Zanuck or Ainge getting on the phone and making a call.
They don't.
That's just not how deals of that caliber happen. But I'm telling you, and this is why I was so excited when they brought Ainge on specifically. Ainge has relationships. Everyone wants to look at D. Wade and say, oh, well, he's a part owner. He's got relationships. That's how it's all going to get done. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think D. Wade has player relations, and he can help with that.
Well, look, I think Dwayne Wade is black. I think Dwayne Wade is respected in NBA player circles. Mm-hmm. And you're in Utah, where black players have not always felt welcomed. And there's a lot of people who will tell you, well, black players aren't going to sign here, right? Like, I think the Jazz have gone out of their way to be an equality, proven, tested, welcoming environment, no matter what color your skin is. And I think that's a huge part of Ryan Smith's ownership group. And I think that's why Dwayne Wade's here. I think Dwayne Wade is somebody that has a lot of respect around the league in player circles.
Right.
It's why Boston is retiring. I had this conversation yesterday too, just talking to an NBA guy that I know. We were just chit-chatting, and I was saying, like, I don't understand the Kevin Garnett jersey retirement in Boston. Like, I know he won a championship there, and people were, this guy was telling me, well, you know what? Kevin Garnett's got a lot of respect among players in this league, and the young players, the new generation of NBA guys, know who KG is.
Yeah. They
remember him winning a championship in Boston. So I think that's a very good point. Like, Dwayne Wade has a role here.
Yeah, and what I was really getting to is that Ainge has the connections in the front offices over the years, and he's the one who built the KG championship team. So that's why I say, like, when you have a team with D. Wade on it who has the player connection, but you also have Ainge who has the front office, rich, powerful dude in the NBA connection, things can get done, but that's not going to happen until the summer.
Jeremy Bolton says, well, hello there, daddies.
Wow.
Wow.
Daddy?
Jeremy Bolton says, I'd love to have Drew Holiday on the Jazz.
Wow.
Well, so would we all. Matchup of the year tonight, Caruso versus Butler. No, I'd be more worried about Caruso versus Donovan Mitchell.
Let's settle this right now.
Because I'm telling you, did anybody see the play that Alex Caruso made the other night?
Yeah, his headband was soaking wet for sure.
I mean, he gets a strip and then runs back and gets an and one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm telling you, man, you can joke about my guy AC. You're going to see it tonight. And maybe he gets blown up. I'm sure it'll happen. He's going to cause turnovers. He's going to block shots. He's going to strip guys. Alex Caruso's the guy that strips Rudy Gobert in the paint.
Because I'll drop that mother.
He's the guy that can stay in front of any player on this Jazz roster. So
Good luck.
they are a different team with Alex Caruso on the floor defensively. The question, here's my frustration with the Bulls. Zach LaVine's overrated. Zach LaVine's overrated. I'm telling you, he is a great player. He is dynamic. He's overrated.
Yeah.
He is overrated. Caruso versus Mitchell. Child, please. You done messed up, my mom, Monty. Okay.
Who said that?
Jeremy Bolton.
Well,
we'll see.
Not a good question.